Welcome to the Own It Powercast, the place to be when you get serious about making big changes and accelerating growth in your life and in your relationships. Finally create the life you've always wanted, living life on your own terms. Learn how to take your fear and turn it into powerful choices that will create sustained change. Now your host, Mary Baker.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Own It Powercast, a place where you can come to get what you need to move yourself forward. Hey, it's Mary Baker, and welcome to episode 151, Craving Approval, How People-Pleasing Can Add to the Crazy. All right, so as you know, all month, we've been trying to figure out what is crazy in your life right now, some of the typical culprits, and how to get grounded and create and maintain some much-needed balance. Remember that slippery slope that we talked a little bit about last week? Well, one of the ways we can be sure to start that downward slide to creating chaos and stress in our life is to people please. Now, some of you are very familiar with what people pleasing means. Some of you are not. Some of you are anywhere in between. But let's check in with the definition first. According to Merriam-Webster, a people pleaser is someone who pleases or wants to please people often. A person who has an emotional need, and that's key, emotional need, to please others often at the expense of his or her own needs and desires. And let me add to this definition a little bit that I think the focus is most often on the other person or group. Focus is not within self. So our focus is like on our bosses, our partners, our family members, because we're trying to make others happy. We focus on what others want and need from us, or what we think they want and need from us, right? Because sometimes they don't even come out right and say it. We just assume. And sometimes getting so knee-deep in it that we can create stress and self-neglect because we don't have a sense of boundaries around when to give and when to give to ourselves. There's this imbalance because there isn't much time or energy left over typically. And that's when you start to feel the squeeze. I also think that that's why more people become aware of their people-pleasing tendencies later in life. Because when you're young and you have lots of time and not so many constraints, you don't have kids yet, that kind of stuff, you can spend all weekend helping your friend move and kill yourself doing it. And you're 20, you're going to bounce back. But it's also not going to impact other areas of your life as much. But when you get older and you have kids that are waiting for you to come home, or family that has to deal with your stressed out mood because you overbooked yourself on a Saturday morning, well, then we have to look at it a little more closely. So remember that people pleasing is parent pleasing. It's a survivor skill that began with trying to please the parent, to take care of the parent's emotional needs, to avoid conflict or maybe even worse, to be loved, to feel accepted, and to be enough just as you are as a little kid. Because there was no certainty that there was acceptance for you as is, aka mistakes and all, it may have become very conditional with you very quickly, realizing that in order to avoid your parents' shaming, rage, abuse, guilt, or other forms of control, then compliance was key. Doing what the parent wanted, which also sometimes meant not voicing your own dissenting opinions. It meant not asking for what you need. It meant not setting boundaries. This is the biggest piece to remember, not setting boundaries, not risking saying no, not risking saying, hey, I don't want to eat that. Or I don't think that's fair. Or I have a different opinion. So some kids will lash out and act out and fight back. But their siblings, 9 times out of 10, they're watching that and they're like, I want none of that. And to take care of the family, quote unquote, they'll be the compliant, the good child who never really got in trouble, got good grades, was a yes mom, yes dad kind of person. They flew under the radar. I mean, we could talk about that aspect all day of making yourself invisible and making your needs invisible. Invisibility means avoidance, right? It also means we cannot be who we truly are unless we define who we are, and boundaries help us do that. So we're going to talk a lot about avoidance today. We're going to talk a lot about boundaries in different ways, and I want you to try to pick up the nuances of this stuff. To survive in relationships, we may turn to avoidance. Remember controlling the outcome? You have your overt controllers. They scream and yell and boss people around. But then you have the terrorists, the covert controllers, who are avoiding conflict, avoiding pissing you off, avoiding bad outcomes or perceived bad outcomes. There's avoidance of conflict, of rejection, or even abandonment, even if that means being left emotionally in the kitchen. When someone turns their back on you because you said no and they shut you out emotionally, you feel it. Avoidance of your needs, your feelings, or your desires because they're not validated or honored. Your boundaries growing up also could have been violated emotionally, psychologically, or maybe even physically or sexually. So in order to survive, you ignored the real self and had to focus on others to manage them instead. I mean, how jacked up does that sound? Here is a child having to do grown-up things to manage grown-ups. It is more common than you think. And there is a continuum of this, guys, before you let yourself off the hook. Remember, maybe your mom still cooked dinner or dad still took care of the family, but emotionally, nah. You had to maybe step up and do some grown-up things to take care of grown-ups. So in order to manage them, you had to make them like you to survive. Maybe you had to go along and keep the peace. Maybe even to feel like you belong. To feel okay, like the family's not going to kick you out. Sounds crazy, but people can feel ostracized by the family in the living room. Maybe to keep them from abusing or criticizing you, even if that just means they don't confront you or give you a hard time. So let's talk about some of the examples of people-pleasing and examples of avoidance, the risk aversion, the secretly managing the outcome. Remember, this could be conscious or unconscious. Hopefully, if it's been unconscious for you, you're far more conscious today. Yeah, maybe a little disgusted, and that's okay. But you'll become more and more aware as you go if you struggle with this. So one example, the Captain Obvious, is you have a really hard time saying no. It's whatever you have attached to it, what your family has taught you. Maybe it feels selfish or unkind or uncaring. Okay, so how could you? To add to this, you may also feel responsible for other people's feelings and therefore don't want to disappoint them, make them angry or sad. As if you have that power, right? But you think you do. And not that we don't want to take into account how our behavior and choices may affect others, of course. But this takes it a step too far. This is, I'm going to make you mad if I tell you no, I can't go on Saturday, so I'm just going to suck it up and smile and go anyway, to my own detriment. You're avoiding conflict, you're avoiding rejection, you're avoiding their anger. And if you grew up with some nasty anger, or even if you grew up with mom and dad and other people in the home doing nasty anger back and forth, here you go. That's where you learned to not want to have any piece of that. How many times have I sat with and interviewed people whose parents fought like cats and dogs, even if just verbally? They themselves, in their adult relationships, are very avoidant and compliant. And then they're lying, right? Because remember, avoidance is lying, guys. I don't care how you slice it or what lipstick you want to put on it. It's not emotionally honest. Speaking of that, one of the other examples of people-pleasing is you tend to agree with everyone on the outside. Because you want to fit in. You want to be liked. You want to bond with them. All these unmet family needs, are you seeing them here? Even when you may disagree with people, or even to the point where it may go against your values, that's when it gets really hard. This is avoidance of conflict and rejection here, and maybe 3 other things I haven't even thought about. If you come up with more as you're listening, that's totally cool. So you pretend to agree, you nod your head, and you smile. I mean, not that we want to fight with everybody we talk to. Not that we need to do the other form of control, try to get them to see, try to convince them to take on our values and our views of the world and politics and family and God knows what. But in appropriate situations, going along to get along means you have to subvert what you really think, feel, and need, so you have to agree. I want to put a sidebar here. Remember we talked about triangulation before? Oh, if you're the middle person in that triangle, how many times, raise your hand, did you agree with both parties on the face? Right? You made friends with both people, didn't you? You were so afraid to piss one of them off. You're like, I know, she's terrible, isn't she? When you're talking about the third party. So we got to think about that one too. It's hard not to, because you have power. They like you right now and they don't like them. It sounds really fifth grade because it is. But you have no idea how often grown-ups do this. Okay, another example of people pleasing is, like we pointed to earlier, you feel really responsible for how other people feel. Like you really feel guilty when someone's upset. You really think it's your fault. That they're disappointed. Like you've ruined things. Not that we're not going to disappoint each other. We are. We're going to make each other mad. We're going to let each other down. Because one person wants to do one thing, the other person doesn't. And there's nothing wrong with either person, right? But you really feel responsible. I mean, this is a heavy guilt that you carry that's unearned. Remember, unearned means you didn't cause it. You didn't do anything that really was awful. So you really feel responsible for, and even their choices, like how they don't make good choices from there on out. Like they're a victim all weekend because you couldn't go to the thing. I mean, it gets more ridiculous the deeper you dive into this. But I just want you to think about situations that you're familiar with this aspect, whether it's your own or, talking to someone else about it. So another big avoidance aspect is you fear conflict. And like we pointed to earlier, maybe growing up with conflict was awful. People raged, they shut down, they acted out, they slammed doors, they shamed you, they shamed each other, you name it. So who would want to repeat that? Because saying no or otherwise asserting yourself could really bring that back on, and you don't do it. Your subconscious has been programmed. You kind of know, like, the person in front of you today is probably not going to do that. That old programming is there to keep you safe. Another thing that typically happens is you'll start to say no, but as soon as you see the reaction is not beautiful, you start backpedaling really quickly and change your story. Oh, no, it's no problem. No, I can do it. That's fine. You hear yourself saying. Here, you're avoiding the truth. You are lying. I want you to notice if you talk to other people this week and if they ask for something and you give, kind of like a negative response, like, I don't know if that works for me, and see what they do. See if they hold their no, or if they quickly acquiesce and backpedal and pretend, quote unquote, that they didn't need to go home anyway, or they didn't need to do this thing anyway. And then if you're close enough to them, gently call them on and say, hey man, you first said no, and I want to help you honor that. And just because I'm disappointed doesn't mean I don't want you to take care of yourself. Those people need to hear that all the time. Another way you people please is because it's craving approval, right? Lots of validation on everything from soup to nuts. You crave it, you seek it, and you'll ask, hey, how was that soup? Speaking of soup, or all the wonderful fill-in-the-blank things I've done for you this week. We're avoiding rejection because we think that if we didn't do the conditional do something really well or perfectly, or make someone's day or rescue them or relieve their burden, that we're not okay as people. That math doesn't work, guys, and we know that intellectually, but I'm not speaking to your head. Avoiding abandonment, avoiding rejection of who we are. Do you see how the focus is on the other throughout all of these examples? all of these are about avoidance of reality, I think. The reality that, guess what? You can't make everyone happy. Guess what? You're going to have to say no sometimes. And people are going to have to say no to you too. And that's okay. It's avoidance of true boundaries where you end and others begin. Responsible to each other, not for. We're responsible for little kids and elderly and sick people we're taking care of. Everyone else is making choices. You're afraid to share what you really think and feel and need, especially when you're pissed or hurt about what someone said or did, right? You avoid being seen as different. If you grew up in a family where different was not good, like you had to, and most unhealthy families do this, go along with the program, not speak up, not bitch about it, and God forbid you should tell anyone outside of the family what's really going on. You have to do groupthink, or you're going to pay. Even as a grown-up, you're going to pay. I sit with people all the time where they're one of the first people to be the whistleblower in the family. Sometimes they end up being the only whistleblower, and they estrange siblings in the process. Your sibling gets freaked out by you, I don't know, confronting mom on her awful, manipulative, abusive behavior, perhaps. Or how your dad manipulates and guilts you. Or maybe you're tired of your parents rescuing your brother who can't get his shit together and can't get clean and can't keep a job. And you're the bad guy because you don't want to go along and spend your whole weekend doing that for the 24th time. You're done. You've detached. You've grieved. You've let go of him. Yes, it still hurts, but you're not trying to change him anymore. So people pleasing is all about avoiding the reality, avoiding boundaries, avoiding the outcomes that perhaps could be bad. Because if they're bad, we could be abandoned. So it creates a whole thing of conditional self-worth, the human doing what you can do and be for others, and not for yourself, perhaps. What does people pleasing create? Some of this is so hidden and insidious that you may not see it at first, but believe me, it's coming. When I sit with relationships where one person is a people pleaser or avoidant, oh boy, there's all kinds of damage. Usually they're very nice, kind people, though, so not the kind of damage you would see up front. The first big one that I notice all the time is loss of trust and respect. Because somebody's going to be upset, and probably those closest to you because you figure they ain't going anywhere. Better piss off them than the boss or the neighbor, right? Since you can't say no to anyone, really, you probably are overbooked, overpromised, and you're going to end up letting your family down, or your partner down, or your kids down. Over time, they will lose trust and faith in you, I promise. And they won't have a hell of a lot of respect for you because they can't. If they can't also trust you to set boundaries with evil people in your life, that's a whole nother level of trust. I think that's even worse because that creates tons of anxiety and fear in them. I see this all the time with in-laws. If your parents or your family have some really, really unhealthy behaviors, and they're not really great to your partner or your kids or both, and you don't set boundaries with that, one of these days you're going to lose the respect and the trust of your kids and your partner. I watch it all the time. You are the only one that can keep them safe. They need to trust you to bar the door. There's a loss of self. This is a big one, and we could devote a whole episode to it. Self-abandonment. Because you, over time, if you're people-pleasing, you have to forget what you love, what you need, and what you stand for. Your boundaries. Your values. And I think this really reinforces low self-esteem that got you here in the first place and cements it in place. Especially since there are no boundaries with other people, and there are no boundaries with yourself. I mean, internal boundaries are self-discipline that we've talked all about. How can you respect yourself if you can't even trust yourself to say no when you need to say no? Or to speak your truth when you need to? which is why the vicious cycle, I think, because the more you dive into people pleasing, the more, and we're going to talk about this, the more you're focused on them, the more you lose you, the more miserable you are. For good reason. One that we don't often talk about or think about is loss of connection, of real connection. You know, if we're not showing up with any sort of vulnerability or truth in our relationships, and gosh, guys, I run across this all the time working with relationships. How can others really know and connect with who we really are? Guess what? They can't. I hear that complaint all the time from partners of avoiders. They say things like, I never know what they really think and feel until they blow up, right? Because you're stacking dynamite because you're not saying no along the way. I don't know what's in their heart. I don't know what they need from me, Mary. They never tell me. They never say no. So I can't relate to them. I don't feel connected with them. I don't feel emotionally safe with them. Isn't that interesting? All that people pleasing is not making people in your life feel safe, guys. It's the other way around. You're not being honest. You're shutting down part of you, and they know that. We feel this intuitively. And in that relationship, there's a loss of boundaries. That's another cost. There are no boundaries. And guess what? You can't negotiate or problem solve with each other because we only have one person here and the other person just kissing ass. We don't have two people here. We have enmeshment. And unless you have two separate people who stand in their truth, take responsibility for self, because people pleasers don't do that, you can't negotiate and have agreements, right, that are real. People feel good enough about them and therefore can carry them out. And they're co-agreements. Both parties are responsible equally for that agreement. Those things build trust. We talk about them all the time here on the show because they matter. And finally, the resentment of those people who keep asking you for things. How dare they? Don't they know how exhausted you are? Don't they know how you haven't gotten anything done at your house in weeks because you've been helping them? Don't they know that you haven't done a bit of self-care in months because you've been doing for them? Don't they understand how tired you are? No, because you don't. It's not for them to understand. It's for us to understand and take responsibility and take our power back. It's not fair to them, I would argue, because you're secretly mad at them. They feel it because you're short and you're shitty and you're impatient and you're irritable, but you keep doing for them, right? You don't stop. What a mixed message, and we're putting our stuff on other people when we do that. And underneath, you're secretly mad for allowing yourself to do all of this and giving everyone all your power. So although on the surface, being kind and easy to get along with seemed like very good qualities, I think the art of people pleasing takes it further so that we're pleasing others in a way because we're trying to control them and manage their impression of us. And deep down, when we do that, we betray what we really think, feel, and need sometimes. We betray what we really think, feel, and need, and are often doing this to our own detriment. We're over-promising, we're overbooking, and we're not saying no. And therefore, guess what? We are definitely creating chaos in our life pretty quickly. If you struggle with people-pleasing, even with some people more than others, don't go it alone. Grab a counselor or a coach or a support group who can help you to work to establish better boundaries, love yourself through this, figure out where it came from, and practice having the courage to change it. So today we talked about, I think, a common and insidious struggle that so many people have and won't admit, people-pleasing behavior. I think at its core, it's fear-based, it's impression management, it's control, and has some huge hidden costs that I think are so important to look at and can certainly create lots of imbalance in our lives and stress and chaos. It is a long-standing coping skill learned in childhood for survival, And I also know that it can be changed if worked on diligently with love and support, with accountability, and some deeper work. Thank you so much for joining me today. May you stay healthy and in your truth and hold your no. Focus on the good in yourself and find some good out there this week. Be sure to check the show notes at ownitpowercast.com and sign up for the newsletter each Tuesday if you don't already get it. All right, pay it forward, keep focusing on you, and I'll see you next time.
We hope you took away some useful insights and tools you could begin using right away. If you did, please leave a positive review and share on your social media. Because could you imagine if everyone in your life really got it together? Remember, own it now, so you can really own it later.